Dr. Mohammad Akmal Makhdum has spent more than 3 decades of his life as a registered psychiatrist, helping people to achieve their full potential every day. He was born in Pakistan and raised by a family of academics, including his father, Dr. Mohammad Akmal, who is credited as being the founder of psychology in Pakistan. Let's hear now from this industry elite. Discuss your 35 years experience as a psychiatrist and your career in general and helping people and what that's meant to you both professionally and personally as well.
In terms of psychiatry and mental health, it runs in my family in the sense that my father was a professor of psychology, the first professor of psychology in Pakistan, and he introduced the subject of psychology to the country, established the first department of psychology in the country, and the first counseling center. So basically a pioneer and highly regarded and respected person. And because he was a very good human being as well, and an excellent loving father, I always wanted to emulate him. And when I realized at a very young age that psychology and mental health was his favorite subject, I was obviously drawn to it. So I would not say genetic, but I would definitely call it familial or nurture played a great deal in this. My mother herself was a master's level student when my parents got married in psychology. So that was the norm. And as I tell people, that first time I heard the name Sigmund Freud was at the age of 4. So this was an interest. The other thing was that interacting with human beings was a very attractive experience for me. I always found people interesting, always enjoyed company, always loved discussions and conversations. And when I realized as I grew up that people were not always positive, they were not always happy, they were not always relaxed, and there were times when they were distressed. I myself was distressed, whether it was because of poor results in the exams or friendships or whatever. So the issues regarding these trials and tribulations of human mind and mankind became more relevant and interesting, and I then decided that I should and must have a career in psychiatry. And your question is so vast because it wants to capture the 35 years of my life, my professional life. I found it extremely gratifying, extremely satisfying. I wouldn't say that it was self-actualization in terms of satisfaction in its entirety, but it did satisfy a great deal of my vocation and my own psychological desires, in the sense that I was able to help lots of people, I was able to understand lots of people, I was able to understand myself, I was able to help myself and try to be a better human being. I was able to see how mind can be such an asset and such a liability, and that actually gave me the learning and the experience of how to try to keep myself balanced as far as I could. I was also able to see human beings' limitations in terms of how habits and genetics work. And that was a great revelation, that not everything can be discussed out or thought out or cognitively managed. There are bits of those deep human DNA, genes, and those chemicals that do prevail at the end. So overall, I would say it was a highly satisfactory experience working in psychiatry, as long as one did the clinical work. Yes.
Was there a particular moment, maybe earlier in your career, that, when you were looking around your family and you saw a family full of so many different psychiatrists, and obviously from an early age you had mentioned you became familiar with Sigmund Freud and his work. Was there a particular moment, maybe growing up, maybe when you were a little bit older, that maybe it was an encounter with someone else and you just kind of thought to yourself, this is definitely something that I want to, it somewhat reinforced your decision and your thinking that you wanted to get into this to begin with, but this encounter, maybe it just reconfirmed what you had already thought?
I would actually say that these encounters were numerous. There were many such individual encounters that reaffirmed for me that I needed to do this and I wanted to, and I should do that. But primarily those encounters were encounters with my own family, my own dad. Let's put it that way. Because he himself was a celebrity. He was highly respected in the country. People came from all over to seek his advice. I was always, sort of watching in the on the wings, looking at how much admiration, adulation, and respect that he commanded, the creativity he generated, and when he spoke, it was like poetry flowing out of wells of knowledge. So I had such encounters which affirmed and reaffirmed for me frequently. On some occasions, I was able to sit on his lectures, and that was a great learning experience. But I had the pleasure of meeting, the great Professor Linford Rees, and he was the president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and many other great people. And one other person that I must mention was Dr. Philip Rack. He was the founder of transcultural psychiatry, and he wrote a seminal book in English, maybe first of its kind, in England, was titled Transcultural Psychiatry. And Philip Rack was a person that I really admired and respected. And he was a great human being, simple, humble, and what a brain. So yes, I was very fortunate in having the regular affirmation through living with a living legend, and then of course having the pleasure and the experience of meeting with people like Philip Rack and others.
Where would you say we're at today as a society with the field of psychiatry, and maybe comparing it to when you first started out over 3 decades ago, and seeing where we're at today here in the year 2020? Where do you think we're at? Do you think we've evolved to a good place? Is there still a lot of work to do in general? Your thoughts on that one?
In terms of the delivery of psychiatry, I would say that that is definitely far, far better, the understanding and realization that psychiatric problems are so rampant. That is definitely the case. So we are far advanced as societies, especially Western societies, in realization of the value of psychiatry. But in terms of how services are being evolved, I have a little issue with that the growing business interest coming into public psychiatry is going to create a two-tier system where the poor are going to suffer. And the problem with medicine in general and psychiatry in particular is that there cannot be two-tier system in delivery. Because if you have a system where the moneyed get a better treatment compared to those who are poor, then how is it you're going to help the core issue of good mental health? How are you going to be able to achieve that? So that basic dichotomy in psychiatry, in my view, does not work when you have a massive business model coming into psychiatry. I think somehow national well-being or societal well-being has to be a publicly funded system. So that is what ideally I would suggest. And that's where I have my problem with where society seems to be going, especially in England. I am aware that there is public availability of services in many countries, but of course, US being the top economy in the world, there is an issue where the moneyed versus the poor have a clear-cut differential in reception of service. In terms of psychiatric knowledge, it is far advanced, but far from satisfactory. The core model of psychiatry is not a universal model in my view. The core model of psychiatry in terms of Western society is acceptable the way it is. It is purely a Western model, but the Western model of psychiatry where a psychiatrist has certain limitations, psychiatrist has to play by these Western modes of values and the Western structures, that I do not think is relevant for Eastern societies like India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and other places where large populations are present. For that, I believe that the Eastern-Western marriage of models, the guru model or the teacher model or the guide model, the murshid model of the East, mixed with the psychiatric specialist model of the West would be more relevant, because Eastern cultures and Eastern societies work differently. They are far older than Western societies, and that is why the norms that Western societies have evolved are specific to Western societies. I, coming from the East, living in the West, I believe that there is a massive benefit for the marriage of these two models, and I think for the coming generations where family is dwindled and dwindling, family configurations are changing. There are two fathers and two mothers and, mixtures and multiple sort of stepfather figures and others. So these are the social challenges where there hasn't been such long history how society adapts to it. And in Eastern societies, these are socially not acceptable and not prevalent. So for that, I would say that some old, new variation and configuration of psychiatry needs to be done as well. And that is the way of the future, in my view.
There's so much talk today about mental health and mental health awareness, probably more so than it's ever been in history. People are more open to talking about it. It's more, you could say socially accepted today in general. Your take on younger folks and, people under the age of 30, the younger generation, millennials, Gen Zers, especially college students, if we want to focus on that one specifically, because there's so much pressure today with students in college and for a variety of reasons, and there's a lot of stress and trying to deal with that and trying to create that balance in their life with getting their work done, but also making sure that their mental health is working properly as well. If you could comment on maybe your experience or what you've observed, maybe through some colleagues of yours or just in general, younger population today, folks, especially college students who are trying to, make sure their mental health is, at its peak.
I just before my last job was actually working with younger folk and adolescents and young people, and my feeling is that the social structures that are changing, and because of the family configuration changing, and there is a great deal of disturbance in families. The way one starts one's life as a child may not have the same figures as mother or father, when you're an adolescent, and may still have a different configuration when that person is older. And so that lack of ability to rely on certain permanent emotional support renders a young person more vulnerable to seeking support from elsewhere. And what I see is that peer pressure, peer influences, then substance use and substance misuse, and then instability in relationships, that leads to a great deal of distress and challenges, I would say. So I have found that more and more people, compared to my practice 30 years ago and 25 years ago, I've seen more younger people either recognizing their distress or having an increased severity of feeling their stress. And as a result, we see more and more demand for young people seeking and adolescents seeking psychiatric help. I would suggest that this is something that planners need to focus on, because if you find that you are leaving large fractions of young people without psychological and emotional support, you may find societies having overall difficult dynamics, developing difficult dynamics 10 years later, because large numbers of disturbed people will be around in a community or in a society. They will create various sorts of disturbances, not least emotional disturbances. So I would say that I have found, as people said, once upon a time in autistic spectrum disorder and neurodevelopmental disorder was only about 1%. Now some societies and communities are reporting 11%. Now that's currently no causes known, but obviously this is happening, and this is a huge planning and resource challenge. And of course, the greatest challenge is during the younger and adolescent years. In terms of colleges and universities, and this is what I find, that for many people, the colleges and universities become their families. Their friendships become their families. And that's where one needs to realize that there is something more permanent required, except for that reliance. And what is that? I really don't have a clear answer for that, but maybe you may guess from what I'm saying that there is a need for certain permanent figures of emotional and psychological support in someone's life that will sustain them until they become of a mature, balanced age themselves.
What is something that maybe a lot of younger people can do, more of an easier thing to try and relieve some of that stress at those moments when it seems like the weight of the world is on our shoulders? What's something we can maybe do that not necessarily groundbreaking, but it's an easier thing that can just help, just little by little to relieve some of that weight that seems just weighing down so heavily? It's a very profound question, but has a very, I would say, simple view in my, answer in my view. I think that
group sport is something that is really helpful. It brings a degree of interaction, camaraderie, collaboration, support, physiological transformation, overall endorphin release and happiness and satisfaction. I also believe that any interest of a positive and adaptive sort, whether it be some group video games that many young people play, or whether it is soccer or hockey or whatever. So I think that is something which is really good. What we find in England is that there are two types of people or groups, the football crowd and the rugby crowd. And there are cultural differences which have evolved, but that is something that generally helps a great deal in terms of bringing relief and some relaxation. So my view is that any form of group exercise or group sport is the way forward in that.
I want to transition for a second here and discuss another area that is very burdensome on people's lives and people who've been affected by it, and different diseases in general, and cancer. And I know you've been touched by cancer personally, and if you could somewhat discuss the topic of cancer and people being affected by it in their lives, and whether it's someone in their family or friends, and how people tend to deal with that, or how they could deal with that through through reflection, and through just just trying a lot of different things that can better help their mental health through those trying, difficult times.
Yes. Obviously, I'm currently dealing with it at a particular stage. A member of the family had it, and we've just experienced deep personal grief, and we're trying to deal with that. The issue with cancer is that it is apparently considered to be a death sentence. And that's what is the biggest issue with that. And I think that somehow a degree of understanding of what cancer, that is not a monolithic or a single entity scenario. People can live between 3 months to 30 years with it. And so I think that, first of all, I believe that there needs to be a degree of clarity as much as possible on what type it is, where are the knowledge about it, and a thorough, detailed knowledge about a cancer is essential. And this is how we try to deal with it in the first instance: what it was, what variety, what are the treatments available, what is the range of longevity and survival rate, etc. And that was something that one was able to then look at various degrees of stages of planning. That, okay, it is this type, this is variety, these are the centers where they offer treatment. So should we then organize step number 1, step number 2? So the more busy you get in getting deeply involved, there is no way that you can deal with it by forgetting about it or trying to displace it. The only way to deal with it is absolutely and totally in a frontal manner. That may not be the case for the sufferer. So I'm talking of as the bystander or a loved one or a member of the family or a or a spouse. I'm talking from the second person point of view. For the first person point of view, it is an individual reaction, how they want to deal with it. Some don't want to deal with it, don't want to talk about it, and that you must respect. There is no right and wrong answer to that. But as far as the person who's trying to deal with it from the outside, that's where I find that there is no way that you can deal with it in a passive manner with trying to displace it or suppress it. You have to deal with it. And once you get all that knowledge, once you know exactly what is going on, the pathology, the physiology, the management, and then you plan and then you work on that plan. So as long as you are doing that, then obviously it becomes far more positive, far more constructive, far more satisfying in the sense that you know that you're doing something very positive, and you're able to do for your loved one whatever is available. And I'm talking of especially in societies where public health provides such services like all treatment is free in England, and top quality treatment is free in United Kingdom. So in such societies, of course, it's easier for people to adapt to that. In societies where you have to pay for it, obviously, the financial challenge supersedes all other challenges, because you know that there is treatment and you can't afford it. Obviously, that in itself is such a distressing and unfair scenario. So that is one. Then when, of course, cancer ultimately leads to what we all have to experience, the end of life. And that's, of course, a very, very difficult time. And but, of course, you need to, again, structure your knowledge, your love in regards. You need to break down that, this is where the loved one is, and I need to do this, and I need to do that. And there's a lot of support groups and a lot of information, and the palliative care teams are available, and you can get a lot of help from them. That's something that keeps you busy and positively engaged, yet being aware of what's happening. And when ultimately, death strikes, after the initial rituals of funerals and burials, where, of course, you're in a state of bewilderment and shock and surreal reality, then you also need to evolve a degree of grieving steps. I have found that lack of grieving always causes problems and depression and distress. Ultimately, one needs to evolve one's own regular rituals of grieving, whether it is sitting in the car, remembering the loved one, going into the room, locking doors, being able to talk to the loved one, going to the grave, talking to the loved one, and so on. So I think if some part of the day in the initial phases, months, year of bereavement, if one is able to develop such rituals, then a great deal of catharsis, a great deal of love, affection, link, loyalty that was there when the person was alive, that continues, and you are satisfied with your own commitment to the memory of the loved one, that you are, still there for them and they're still there for you. As long as, however long you want to do that. For some people, 3 months are enough. Some people, 3 years aren't enough. And some people do that for all their remaining lives. And some people actually, within a few weeks, overcome it. But I think that for those the majority of us who want to grieve for a longer period, I would say that a self-evolved grieving ritual with expression, with words, with tears, with written words, with letters, works, they work.
What is something that if you could reflect back on your younger self and just stuff you've learned over the years, if you can kind of boil it down to one of those things that always stands out in your mind that, you wish your younger self would have known, what is something, if you kind of reflect on the work you've done over the years, that stands out to you?
I think that if I were more mature earlier, I should have realized that if you are a troubleshooter and problem resolver, the sooner you resolve a problem in your service, in your job, very soon you become surplus to need. So I think that as I always try to resolve problems, wherever I worked, whether they were administrative, service delivery, service development, instantly I found that after a little while, after having resolved the problem, they didn't need me anymore. So I would probably slow down for self-survival in terms of trying to offer solutions which will immediately ameliorate every other problem for the people. But then you get this very deep sense of rejection and thanklessness when you are immediately made redundant, if not literally, then at least emotionally. So that is one. The second thing I realized over time was that nothing works until you have a crisis. People respond to crises. People will take immediate steps in reaction to crises. How world has transformed after having a crisis, wherever, whether the longer term effects may be whatever negative or positive, the world immediately tends to react to crises. And this is what I found in my working life as well, that if you have a good idea, you keep on talking about it, nobody listens to you. At the moment there's a crisis in regards to that, immediately you get funding, immediately you get responses, and so on, for fear of media cover and all that. So I would say that two things that I realized was that if you want to become a hero, don't think that you will have adulation always. Once you've served your purpose, you're no hero anymore. And if you want to get things done, wait for a crisis or create one.
Thanks for listening to Industry Elites.